Let's talk about brisket. Can we make good brisket without a smoker? Let's find out.
This is an American beef brisket. However, it is not prime grade because that's rather expensive.
So thanks to Kenji Lopez, we have a really good starting point for this brisket. However, it's going to take 36 hours, which is basically a day and a half. So I'm basically going to prep it so I can set it tonight at 10, have it at 10, a day and a half from now, 10 a.m., 10 a.m. Therefore, cook it after, have it for dinner, late lunch.
He begins by switching his plastic cutting board and removing all plastic wrappings, then blots the beef dry. Using a sharp deboning knife like this one, he begins trimming the fat around the brisket so that it is roughly a quarter-inch thick. He removes part of the lining from underneath and removes the burnt ends from the top. He then cuts the brisket into 3. This is excess fat, which will not render nor provide flavor. This too is reduced. The thickness of the fat is now consistent. As he nestles it between the other 2 pieces, he searches for a plastic bag within the box of bags and sizes the piece accordingly, only to find out that his box of bags is empty.
I'm out of bags.
Disheartened, saddened, and annoyed with himself, his preparation is now on hold. In the meantime, he places his meats into Ziploc bags, stacks them to form a brisket building, and places them into the fridge. Later that evening, he returns with the appropriate provisions. As he displays out his meats, he grabs his kosher salt and roughly adds about a quarter cup to a ramekin or bowl. Next, he grabs the pepper that took the black. As he grinds, he realizes it will take an insurmountable amount of time to complete. He measures out a quarter cup of peppercorns and adds it to his blending cup. And maybe a bit more. He caps it and takes it to the pulverizer. Although not ideal by any means, it mostly yields a semi-coarse grind that we seek. The peppercorns should not be distinguishable. He cleans his hand and adds the black dust into the ramekin. He then invokes the Jason method by using a chopstick and stirs to combine the ingredients. Once mixed, he sets it aside and brings in the first piece of beef. Using the Dexter preferred seal bags, he measures out an appropriate length for his piece of flesh and cuts it, albeit with a less than straight line. However, it will work just fine with this vacuum sealer, which requires an extension cable. As he plugs in the sealer, he fails, and has to reverse the plug. Then nothing happens, as expected. Except, he scares himself when he accidentally sets off the vacuum sealer. The bag is placed in the machine and the lid is pressed to create a seal, except it doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes if there's not a complete seal, so just try to move your fingers inward.
I'm over here going off to the sides, like maybe I need to go out more where the hands are. Thank you. I almost sealed the other side.
Finally, it works. After successfully creating seals in all the bags, he folds over the unsealed portion and sets them aside. Then it's time to get to work. He searches intently for a baking sheet and, when he returns, he lines it with paper towels. He removes the meat from the bag and once again blots the meat dry as best he can. The steps are repeated for the remaining pieces, yielding the leaning tower of Mietze. The top piece is popped from the stack and he begins to apply the dry rub rather liberally, making sure to cover all areas of the brisket, including the sides of the brisket. Once complete, he gently lowers it into the appropriate bag so as not to dirty the side flaps, which can subsequently prevent a good seal. Repeats the steps for the others, and the eventual burnt ends are also placed into the bag. Then, using a metal rack like this one, it is placed on the counter and the meat is lowered into it, so that it's held upright. Afterwards, he adds his liquid smoke, Since we can't get regular smoke, 2 teaspoons of the liquefied variety should suffice. But he adds a bit more, which will be problematic. As he lays the bag under the sealer and initiates the process, the excess liquid smoke is simply vacuumed out. As a result, most of the liquid has been deposited in the drip tray. So he cleans and reseals.
One down.
2 down and 3 down. Then he cleans, because ants. As he brings the meat back, he notices he's getting rather late, and he hasn't returned his watch to its rightful location. Using the same rack, he begins placing the meat into separate sections. He uses butcher's twine like this to secure the individual brisket pieces into the temporary metal holding cell. By securing them, he ensures they will not float around and cause circulation issues. The inversion is a success. This large soup pot will serve as a sous-vide bath container. To test its meat containment properties, he slowly lowers the rack in.
This is coming out the top.
Unfortunately, the top portion resides above the top of the pot. Logically, he attempts to insert the rack sideways, but this does not allow enough room for proper circulation. So he removes it. He modifies it by moving one of the meat pieces to the side, and once it fits, he fastens his cooker holder so that it is secure, and then retrieves his immersion cooker. Without him, it is nothing. Without it, he is nothing. There are many like it, but this one is his. He inserts it into the hole and checks for fit and room for circulation.
I really need to just get a big sous vide bin. Take it somewhere quiet.
He takes the pot away to a quiet location where it can be made undisturbed. Apparently, it's super bright in this room. And using a gallon jug or a lowbar glass if nothing else, or a pitcher, he fills the pot with water. If the pot had been filled with water beforehand, it would have been extremely heavy. Once the water reaches an appropriate level, he gives the cooker life like a young Frankenstein. He scrolls into the temperature set to 155 degrees Fahrenheit and sets it to cook. The next step is crucial. He covers the pot with aluminium foil to reduce evaporation. Otherwise, you could end up cooking an empty pot and possibly burning the place down. Then he takes note of the time. In 36 hours, the beef will be ready.
We got some time, so let's talk about brisket. If you've never had good brisket, it's hard to explain. 3 years ago, I walked into a Mission barbecue here in Tampa, and I went to order my usual, which is pulled pork. But then I tried the moist brisket. The first time in my life, I knew exactly why people spent hours, days, cooking a brisket. Now, I've never been to Texas, so I don't know what it's like to have good barbecue around every corner. I don't know what that's like. I don't even know what real Texas-style barbecue tastes like. But if it's anything like the brisket that I've had, I might move to Texas. So I think if we can get just an iota close to good smoked brisket, that'll be a success.
The next morning, he returns to check on the water levels. He removes the foil and checks for condensation, and pokes the hole to drain any captured condensation back into the bottle. He covers it again and lets it be.
So it's like 11 o'clock and I need to make sure that there's water in the vessel or container. Alright, we're good. We're good.
While the oven is still cold, he removes the center rack. He wants the brisket to be front and center. Then he preheats the oven to 275 degrees Fahrenheit with convection, or 300 degrees in a conventional oven. The time to pull the meat has arrived. He disengages the cook and digs through the aluminium coverings, careful not to drip any water on the electrical outlets. Like a monster from the Black Lagoon, the brisket rises from the depths. He frees it from its metal cage and places it onto the baking sheet, which he returns to the kitchen for continuation. Once there, he sets it down and aside. He reaches for a bowl to mix his dry rub, and again adds kosher salt. This time he adds peppercorns he has already ground to a fine sneeze dust, a bit of cayenne for kick, and again uses a chopstick to mix Once it's been evenly distributed, he sets it aside and brings in a baking sheet he has lined with foil of the aluminium, and using a metal cooking rack places it inside, and this too is set aside. It's now time for the meat. Upon inspection it looks like a ship plank in seawater. Yar! Eeny miny miny mo, pick a piper by the toe. Eeny miny 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 mo. This brisket will be saved for later. Next he leads a large vessel. He cuts a small slit in the bag and pulls out the brisket juice. The brisket is removed from the bag and placed on a bed of paper towels. The process is again repeated for the remaining brisket. However, this one requires glamour shots. The brisket juice can be used to fortify barbecue sauce. However, under no circumstance should you pour this down your drain, as it will clog your pipes. He blots both pieces dry as best he can without removing the seasoning. Donning gloves, he cleans his workspace so that he can begin seasoning the meat with the dry rub. As he tries to rotate the brisket, it slides the tray, so he places a towel underneath to prevent the sliding of the awesomeness, and continues adding the dry rub. He wants to cover it completely patted down, including all the crevices. He doesn't want to over-season the meat, but once he's satisfied, he places it on the rack in preparation for the oven. Then he moves on to the next piece. Oh yeah. Brisket. Spices. Pepper. Meat. The remaining piece is placed on the rack and into the oven it goes. However, something must have spilled in the oven and has turned into a smoker, ironically. Once the smoke is cleared, he places the meat into the hot box for its final journey. He also sets a timer for 2 hours. A quick check on the meat verifies that it's doing well, so we'll let it be. Before it's time to pull the beef, he begins preparing. He cuts 2 large pieces of foil of the aluminium and opens the window, because extra light is always welcome. The time has arrived. He removes the brisket from the oven and places it on the counter. Behold the meats. Using tongs, he grabs one of the pieces and places it onto the aluminium foil, and tense it. This allows the moisture to redistribute to the meat as it cools, but maintaining a warm temperature. He tensed the second piece of meat as well, ensuring a nice firm seal, and now the meat must rest. Only when the internal temperature is between 145 and 165 degrees Fahrenheit is the brisket ready to be consumed.
My brisket's cooling down now, so I can eat it.
The time has come. As he measures the temperature of the larger brisket piece, it is still too warm. As for the smaller piece, it is perfect.
Quintessential barbecue requires black gloves. I don't know if I've gotten fat, but the gloves are kind of small.
This brisket looks perfect. Upon tasting, it is perfectly cooked. There is a nice fat cap, rather moist meat, and all things considered, a decent bark. That is moist, which is more than can be said for most of the barbecued brisket available, has just the right amount of tenderness and bite, so delicious it does not require barbecue sauce.
So now that I've had a lot of brisket, I think it's time to recap what we learned. Can you make smoked brisket without a smoker? No. the smokiness that you get on the bark and the flavor that it imparts on the meat from the wood is just, it's a different level altogether. And you just can't get that with sous vide. But we did have really, really, really good brisket. Let me know down below what you think I should do next. If I should continue down this path of smokerless barbecue, get a smoker, or just move on to something else. Thanks for watching. And special thanks to Colin on Patreon for supporting me. Until next time, stay well.